Okay, so again, בוקר טוב ושבוע טוב. Our shiur is dedicated לעילוי נשמת רפאל משה בן אליהו זיכרונו לברכה, and our hero for today is Rav Yaakov Shaul Eliashar, which is unfortunately is not known as he should be, and more than in Ashkenazi crowd as we are having here. So it's an obscure name, but I think that is someone very, very interesting, both from an historical point of view and from the halakhic point of view. And I hope that we would have some better, richer understanding of him after this shiur. Now, his standing, Rav Yaakov Shaul Eliashar is his time of activity, his era of activity is the 19th century. He was born in 1817 and passed away at 1906. So that's more or less the 19th century. And he was, in many ways, as I would explain, Bezrat Hashem, he can be seen both as the last of the formal Rishon LeZion or Chacham Bashi, that was the name that the Turks, the Ottomans, gave to the chief rabbi here in Eretz Israel. So he was, you may say, was the last one of the formal Rishon LeZion, and in a certain sense, he is the first Rav Rashi, chief rabbi, in a position that is we are more familiar with today. And I will try to explain in what means do I mean what I just said. So I was really, when I was trying to give the title to the shiur, I was wondering if I should call it הראשון לציון האחרון, or Harav Rashi Harishon. So it's was it the last one of the Rishon LeZion or the first one of the Rabbanim Rashim? Both of them not in the formal title, but I think in what these positions came to represent. And I would, Bezrat Hashem, would explain. Rav Eliashar, what is also interesting about him is that we have his own autobiography. He wrote in 1904, 2 years before his passing, there was a certain historian here in Eretz Israel named Lawrence, Avraham Moshe Lawrence, that said to himself, you know, this guy was born in 1817, so he saw a lot, and it would be worthwhile to ask him to give an account of his life. And Rav Eliashar had done that. So he wrote an account, which is 7 pages long. I won't be able to read everything, only snapshots. But he wrote 7 pages long of his accounts of his life events. And as he was very prominent, he was the Rav Rashi, then obviously he saw a lot. And it's extremely interesting. And it's in a very good Hebrew. I think that we'll be able at least to get the sense of what he speaks about. So you would find it all over the first page in the sources is from his memories. As I said, that I am quoting here, but I am skipping. So it would be every time you see 3 dots, that would mean that I skipped a few sentences. So I begin. אני נולדתי, he writes about himself, ביום כ"ג סיוון תקע"ז. So תקע"ז is 1817, and it's very interesting that he knows his date of birth. Now, for us, that may seem very simple, but for some of you, maybe your parents didn't know their dates of birth. So it is unusual, and it's part, as we will see, he was a man very aware of history, has a very sharp historical senses, which is just interesting. So he knew his exact date of birth, which is כ"ג סיוון תקע"ז, and he says, עטרת ראשי הוא אדוני אבא מרי. Now, the crown on my hand was my father, Abba Mari, הרב המופלא, the wonderful rabbi, חסיד הקדישא, the holy pious man, ועוד מורנו ורבינו, הרב רבי אליעזר ירוחם אלישר, זצוקל, זכרו יגן עלינו אמן. So that is his father. Now, his father came from the Ottoman Empire and ended up in צפת. נתגדל הרב מורי אדוני ז"ל בעיר הקודש צפת, ייבנה ותיכונן, ונתמנה שם לראש השוחטים ובודקים. So his father was the head of the shachtim, right? He was the head of the slaughters. וגם היה מר דיינה, he was also a judge. ושץ, also the, we call today the Kento. בקהילת קודש איסטנבולים. So he was all of these functions in the people that came from Istanbul. So the Istanbulim. So in Tzfat, they had different shuls. So there were shul for people coming from Europe. There were many Hasidim in Tzfat. And there was a shul for people coming from, I don't know, Bulgaria. And there was a shul from people that came from Istanbul. And he was the cantor and the shochet and the dayan in this shul. ולעולם היה שקוד על לימודו ולא ידע מענייני העולם כלל. So Rabbi Eliashar says, my father, he was very much into learning. He didn't really know what is going on. It's very interesting. Rabbi Eliashar himself, as we will see, as I said, he has a very acute awareness of the political arena that he's working in. But he says, my father was a parush. He was someone separated from this world. He was only sitting and learning and slaughtering, I guess. והנה בכל ימי הרב רבי חיים פרחי ז"ל, so there was a certain man, Rav Chaim Parchi, he was not exactly a Rav, but he was a Jewish leader, very important. He was like, think about Rothschild. So someone that is not necessarily very scholarly, but someone that is very rich and is trying to help the Jews. If you're interested, Noam Eshkoli in his podcast had a whole chapter about Reb Chaim Parchi, and you are invited to listen to an excellent chapter. The rest of the podcast. Kedma, thank you. Yeah, Kedma. So as long as this Parchi was alive, itnaeg Abdallah Pacha. Abdallah Pacha was the name of the certain Pecha, right? The local minister from the Ottoman Empire. So as long as this Parchi was alive, the Abdallah, the Pecha, was behaving with the Jews of Akko and the rest of the Galil, Rachamim. So things were going more or less fine. אך בעוונותינו הרבים בראש חודש אלול בליל שבת קודש בתחילת הלילה בשנת תק"פ, אומת השר הצדיק חיים פרחי ז"ל. So Chaim Parchi was killed by his enemies. That's not right now our topic. So if it is תק"פ, that is when our hero, it's 1820, and our hero is 3 years old. And you see how he's giving dates to everything. אומת השר הצדיק, ומאז שר צילם ומגינם של היהודים יושבי עכו והגליל. And from there on, the one that defended, right, the defense of the Jews was removed, and now they were vulnerable, they were open to attacks. ועבדאללה פחת החל לרודפם באף וחמא, this עבדאללה guy began to chase them, ופעם בפעם המית עליהם מיסים וארנוניות חדשים, was taxing them heavier and heavier and heavier, עד כי נלאו נשוא. They couldn't pay anymore, they just didn't have the money. ובייחוד קילה חמתו ביהודים יושבי צפת, so he took revenge from the Jews that lived in Tzfat, מהם הובאו בבית האסורים שבעכו. Some of them he jailed because they didn't pay the taxes, so he jailed them. וגם מר אבא ז"ל נתפס עלו חמס בכפו. He said, they also took my father. וביום י"ז בתמוז, so that's very near the dates that we are now in. So on י"ז בתמוז, on י"ז בתמוז שנת תקפ"ב, that is 1822, תפסו אותו באמצע השוק, so they caught his father while he was traveling or conducting his business in the market, וקשרו ידיו ורגליו, so this is a police raid, in the middle of the market, they chain his father in his hands and feet, וירכיבו על הסוס, and they put him on the horse, ומסביבו 5 אנשי חיל מזוינים, and 5 armed policemen around him, and these are not, nice Israeli guys, policemen that you can argue with about your ticket. These are Ottoman soldiers. והוא צועק במרה, and his father is crying out, מה פשעי ומה חטאתי? What did I do? What my crime is? ואין חונן ואין מרחם. No one is paying, no one is helping him. וביקש מהם שרצונו לראות את בני ביתו, and he asked the soldiers, can at least they take him through his house so he can say goodbye to his family. והסכימו ברוב מתת. This is of course irony. It says in the merciful, right, they agreed at least that he can speak with his household people. והעבירו לפני פתח ביתו, so they were taking him chained and in front of the house of his, in front of the door of his house, and he writes, ואני בהיותי בן 6 שנים, I was 6 years old at the time, זכורני שראיתיו ז"ל והוא בוכה בדמעות שליש. He says, I remember my father. Think what does it do to the soul of a child, 6 years old, and he sees his father crying, and 5 armed soldiers are accompanying him. וגם אנחנו צעקנו צעקה גדולה. He says, of course, my mother and my siblings, we were all crying. ואנשי החיל פנו עורף, and then the soldiers just continued, והוליכו בבהלה ובחוזק יד, עד שהגיעו לעכו. They took him to Akko, to the jail, לעת ערב, והוא יושב בתעניתו, he was fasting and crying, and they put him in the, what was called in the kalabush. So they put him in the Ottoman jail. And he was there from Tammuz to Tevet, so that's almost half a year. He was in the jail, and in Tevet he was able to escape, to run away. Now it doesn't write how was he able to run away. It doesn't seem that that was the type of a man that would jump above the wall. So just knowing how the Ottoman Empire was conducting itself, I would guess that a certain amount of bakshish was given to some people, and suddenly the door was left open, and the guard fell asleep, and he was able to run away, and he's running back to Tzfat, and just return to his work. Now, I am not sure, that doesn't seem very logical to me. That's what he says that had happened. So his father just returned to his old post as the head of the slaughters, and the Dayan and the Cantor of these Istanbul guys. I guess that he really loved them. And so that worked for about a month and a half, from Tevet to Adar. In Gimel Adar, and see how he's giving dates to everything. So in Gimel Adar, בהיות מורי אביזל עומד במקולין, so he was in the slaughterhouse, לובש בגדי המקולין כדרכו, מטפחת על ירחו, סכין השחיטה בידו, so he's with all the apparatus, right? He's standing there in the slaughterhouse, והנה קרב אליו ישמעאל אחד מאוהביו, שמו חסן שאין, and then comes one of the Arab guys that is working there, and his name was Hassan Shain, and he says to him, שמעתי כי אתה נמלטת מבית האסורים שבעכו. I know that you ran away from the jailhouse. You should know that the Pecha gave an order that you would be caught, and you understand what would happen to you and to your family for running away from the jail. And he says, when my father heard that, then he went completely white. For a minute, he couldn't speak, but out of terror, obviously, out of terror. And then the father himself immediately took the first, you would say, taxi out of the city. And he didn't want to go with his son and wife, because he hoped that if he would run away, they would be spared, at least for some time, they would be able to organize themselves, and then they would also run away. And that's what happened. I'm skipping just to save time. But you see, it's a beautiful story. I mean, beautiful. It's a very tragic story, but it's written beautifully. And he says he ran to Damascus, because Damascus back then was under some different pecha. So you could rely that one pecha would not cooperate with the other. That's just the way the Ottoman Empire was built. So he's running away to the pecha of Damascus, and in the meantime, the soldiers come to the house and they completely ransack it, and they are looking, maybe he's hiding here, maybe he's hiding there. So they completely destroy the property, but they did not touch the mother and the child or the children. And then came a messenger telling them that we would meet in Yerushalayim, which was again under some other ruler. And they are using the night, they run out at night, and they reconvene in Yerushalayim. And it is a very beautiful description here, how his father, I'm skipping, ובראות הרב מורי אבי ז"ל אותי, ירד מעל הסוס, he went from the horse, ויקחני בין זרועותיו. He took me, now again, he is recalling his memories from the age of 6 or 7 years old. He says, he took me in his arms, וחיבקני וינשקני, so he hugged me, and he kissed me, וגילה את פניו, and only then, he says, my mother recognized him, because it seems that he maybe closed himself, maybe I don't know exactly what he did to himself, but he was not so easily recognizable. So it took time to his wife even to recognize him. And so all of that was very beautiful. And for a very short time, they were living happily after in Yerushalayim. Now, again, living happily, Yerushalayim, very, very poor, very, very miserable life, but at least they were safe and they were together. Unfortunately, it continues, והנה בעוונותינו הרבים סבל בכל יום, but the father, it seems something went wrong with him because of, well, you know, he was for half in a year in a Turkish jail, and then he had to run away, so that doesn't do any good to your health. And he became very sick, and he died on the father in Taf Kuf Pei Vav. Taf Kuf Pei Vav is 1826, and the child is only 9 years old. 9 years old. So in 9 years, that's very packed life for the first 9 years, for the first decade of his life. And he says, I remained a little orphan, and my mother became a widow. And again, like he is describing their life there. Obviously, they were very difficult. They were given money, donations, as the rest of the Jews of Yerushalayim. They were given money according to the Chalukah system. The Chalukah system was that everyone was given donation from his origin country. So if you were from Poland, then there was the Poland Kollel, and they would donate money and you would be given. If you were from, I don't know, Ashkenaz, from Germany, you'd be given to the German Kollel. If you're from Istanbul, you're from the Istanbul Kollel. Instantly enough, the mother identified herself as being Ashkenazic. That was because her grandfather was called Yaakov Mivilna, which seems to hint that he was an Ashkenazic. Nowadays, historians believe that the mother, and also Rav Eliashar himself, he believed that his mother came from Ashkenazic origins. Today's historians, after finding some documents, they believe the whole thing is a mistake. And it's the mother grandfather was as Sephardic as they come. He just visited Vilna and got this nickname of Yaakov of Vilna. The DNA, I think, is not very important. What is important is that he had this conscience. He thought that he is mixed, that he is both Ashkenazic and Sephardic origins, and that is important for the continuation of the story. Be it as it may, the mother was given her stipend from the Ashkenazic, from the Vilna Kollel in Yerushalayim. I guess they at least believe the story. So she was given, again, she also believed that no one there tried to take money that they were not entitled to. That's what they thought. So in Taf Kuf Peichet, so that is 2 years later, his mother remarried, and she remarried with Rav Binyamin Mordechai Navon, was an important rabbi in Yerushalayim, and didn't have any children of his own. So he really adopted the young Yaakov Shaul as his own child and invested everything in him. And the child paid him with love. We would see it as the story would continue, but he really became the father figure, we may say, that I guess that our hero was longing for. And he was teaching him. So obviously, when you speak about this type of people, then the love is expressing itself through teaching. So they would sit, he says, for the whole day. In the morning, he would teach him Gemara. In the night, he would teach him Agada. In Shabbatot, they would learn Halakha. I give you the whole schedule of how they would learn. And after he got married at the age of 13, as it should be, and yeah, exactly. but but then but then the father, meaning his stepfather, continued to sustain him for the next 20 years. So he says, in total, my stepfather had sustained me for 24 years, from age 9 today, or from age, it should be 10 to 14, and then another 20 years as a married man. So he supported him, he supported his first children, his young children, and he was able, so our hero, Rabbi Yaakov Shaul, was able to sit and to learn Torah. And again, there were things happened. He's giving you all of the political changes that happen. And he says at one point, there was a certain Muhammad Ali Pasha. He's very famous. So a certain Muhammad Ali Pasha, he conquered Yerushalayim, and he says he was so cool. And it was excellent, he says. Why? Because even a small girl, that's how he writes it, even a small girl could walk in the street with a bag full of gold, and no one would try to harass her or to take the money, because they knew that any thief would be met with such cruel punishment that all the thieves just changed their occupation, and it was not worth it anymore. So it's interesting. I continue in Taf Reish Yud Bet. So now we have gone to 18 Yud Bet. That would be 1852. 1852. So he's 36. 1852. His stepfather is sick, and that's meaning he's dying, and he calls his stepson, and he says to him something amazing. He says to him, I made I checked my Excel, right? I checked my spreadsheets, and it seems that I owe people more money than what they owe me. And he says, you know me, you know that all the money I spent on tzedakah, but that's the situation. And I want you to sell everything I have in order to pay my debts after my death. And certainly enough, a few weeks, 2 weeks later, he passes away, and he begins to sell. He sells the house, he sells the belongings, and he still cannot pay in full. And then he does something amazing. Now, from the viewpoint of halacha, of the law, he doesn't have to pay the debt of his stepfather. He doesn't have to load himself the debt of his stepfather, but because his stepfather took care of him for all of these years, he doesn't want him to go to the next world without his debts completely paid. So he goes to all the loaners that gave his stepfather loans, and he says to them, I want you to rip the check, right, that you have in the name of my stepfather, and I am giving you a star, I am giving you a paper on my own name. And he says in the beginning they couldn't believe that I am, because these were considered lost debts. There is no one to pay anymore. So they didn't even believe. He says, yes, I would. So that he says, I did during the Shiva. Now, he didn't have to see Shiva because, again, it was not his real father. But he says, it was important for me that before Shiva ends, my stepfather would not have any more loans, standing loans. So he is going and he's changing all of the checks that are on the name of his stepfather. And he says, it took me 6 months in order to work again and to pay everything in full. And then I had nothing, but also there were no debts standing for my stepfather. I think it's a beautiful story. Okay. So life continued. At a certain point, he became a great rabbi. Obviously, I mean, I didn't say it, but it should have been clear. He was a great genius from a very young age. He had an excellent memory. He had fast a grasp of halacha. And his stepfather his father was also a Rav, but he couldn't learn too much from him. But his stepfather was a great rabbi who taught him everything. So we are speaking about, and he sat for 25 years and just sat and learned. So obviously we're speaking about someone that is very, very esteemed and justfully so. Okay. So he's being asked to go to Damascus, and there was a certain case there between two parties, and to give a judgment. So he is going there, and on his way back, he is being robbed. And fortunately, he escaped with his life, but nothing more than that. And he says, I was not sad about the money. I was not sad about the clothings, but they took the manuscripts I worked on for the last 15 years. And there is no save, there is no cloud, there is no Google Drive. So they took he says, I was only able to recover a few pages, and that was that. All the rest was lost. And so he is mourning for that. He returns to Yerushalayim, and at a certain point, he is being appointed to the position of the Av Beidin, being the central judge in halachic judge in Yerushalayim. It's not the Rav Rashi yet. It's not the Rishon LeZion. There are a few Rishon LeZion, and he lives through them. And then the Rishon LeZion is after 24 years as the Av Beidin, as the head of the judges. The Rishon LeZion passes away, and they come to him and they ask him to become the Rishon LeZion. They want to appoint him as the Rishon LeZion, and he refuses. He says, I want you first to appoint my father-in-law. And I don't know, I wouldn't use maybe first, but appoint my father-in-law. And they wanted him, but he was amendment. He wouldn't budge. He says, no, my father-in-law is more important. He's older than I am. And they had no choice. They appoint his father-in-law. Nonetheless, it was clear that he was already the Av Beidin, and it was clear that many of the answers that were going to his father-in-law, the real person that answered them was himself. So the honorary title went to his father-in-law, but he was not all the answers, but he was answering many of the questions that came. So just one interesting example is okay. So that is a question coming from New York. That's interesting, right? So people from New York are writing to the Rishon LeZion, to the Rav Rashi of Yerushalayim, and they have a very interesting question. Now, they don't write it yet to our hero. They write to the father-in-law. But as we will see in a minute, he's answering in his name. So let's read it inside. Ana nafshai nidrashti, so I was asked, לאשר ביקש מאיתי כבוד מעלתו מורי ורבינו הרב הגדול, מעוז ומגדול, הראשון לציון המרפא זצ"ל, so this is Rav Mordechai Raphael Fengel, I hope that I express his name right, so this is his father-in-law, so he asked me to answer, לסיבת זקנתו וחולשתו הרבה, because he is very old and he's very weak, so he's asked me to answer, למען נשיב מפני הכבוד, לכבוד האדון הנכבד, החכם היקר ונעלה, כבוד שלמות תורתו, יוסף חיים רויז, נרו, ראש חברת בני ציון, אנשי ירושלים תיבדל ותיכונן, שנתייסדה בעיר השם תתברך, ניו יורק. Okay, so there is a shul named Bnei Zion. I have no idea if the shul still exists, but a shul named Bnei Zion in New York. What is their question? כאשר נתייסדה החברה הנזכרת, when they established the shul, עשו תקנות קבועות, so they made a תקנון, right? So they are organized people, so they had rules. And what does it say in the rules? ובכלל התקנות עשו תקנה, כי התפללו בבית המדרש של החברה הנזכרת, כמנהג אשר נהגו להתפלל האשכנזים הפרושים, אשר פה עיר הקודש ירושלים, שהוא על פי מנהג הגר"א. So they decided that they would daven as the Gra is davening. So you know that when you speak about Ashkenaz, so you can speak about Ashkenazim, that's a very wide term, but in the Ashkenazim you can differentiate. You have the people that go as the Gra, you have the people that are Hasidim, and they daven Sfard, and you have Litvaks, so you have different strands in Ashkenazim. Now, this is, I hope that no one would be take offense. But this is like the narcissism of small differences. So that's there is a word here, a word there. Fine, okay. There's something to argue for, and that's always important in shul. So that's what they decided. They would have an הסדגרה. ועתה נתווספו יחידי החברה שאינם נוהגים להתפלל על פי המנהג הנזכר, וחושבים שאינם יוצאים ידי חובתם בתפילה. So now came a few people, and they taka want to say יצמח פורקני. And if they do not say יצמח פורקני in the Kaddish, then they think they do not fulfill their obligation. I'm sure that you never met anyone like that. I met a few. And so these people came in, and they say, we must daven like our minhag. We understand that's your takana, but we must have our way. ועל זה שאל כבודו, אם יש ממש בדבריהם אלה האנשים, אשר אינם רוצים להתפלל, כפי מנהג שהנהגתם ותיקנתם. ובפרט כי בטרם ייכנסו בברית החברה, קימו וקיבלו עליהם כל תקנות החברה. So he says that before they became shul members, they signed that and they saw that they would daven Ashkenaz. But I can only imagine. But I can imagine that someone's father's died, and now he wants to go before the Amud, and he wants to daven as he's used to, as his father daven for his grandfather. So that's you know the people, right? So that's I can easily see, and it's not a surprise. Such a question comes from a place like New York. These type of questions would not come from Poland of the time. Because everyone is the same. You would not come, if you are a Yemenite coming to Poland, you would not go before the Amund and daven that is not going to happen, right? You would not need to ask a question to Yerushalayim. That would be very clear. But if it's New York, then people come from all over, so there is no Minhag America, right? So no one knows what to do. And B, there are almost no Rabbanim. Who would you ask in New York in the middle of the 19th century? So they asked the question to the chief rabbi of the Jews. Where would the chief rabbi of the Jews live? In Yerushalayim. So they asked the question to Yerushalayim. I can also maybe suggest that it is easier to ask a Sephardic rabbi. Because if you'd ask an Ashkenazic rabbi, they are invested, right? Because some of them are Hasidic, some of them are Quranics, so they are biased. But you ask a Sephardi, he has no share. So he doesn't care if you daven Gra or you daven Elita. Anyhow, you do not daven the right fila. So they hoped, I guess, to get a more unbiased answer. That's what they did. And I would say that he had no problems answering them. So he has a very long, almost all of his responses are very long. There is no way that you would be able to learn here the tshuvot in full. So I'm just giving you, not even the highlights, I'm just giving you the bottom line. And he says, לפי קוצר אני הודעתי, so according to my short and humble mind, הדבר פשוט שלא יוכלו לשנות ממנהגם הראשון. He says, it's clear to me that they are obligated to continue and daven according to their old costume, either in your shul, or they can open a new shul. But they cannot change. So interesting. They cannot change to your minhag. And then he has a very long piece. And then he says, only if they don't have a minyan, then they must go to your shul. And if they go to your shul, then they must accept your nusach. So as individuals, they need to carry their own costume. But if they have no other choice, because they don't have a minyan of themselves, and they join your shul, then they should accept whatever takanot you did in your shul. That's an interesting decision. It's a modern decision. I would explain in a minute why. Because again, back in the old country, and I don't care if the old country is Poland, or the old country is Morocco, or the old country is Yemen. If you came to a new place, you are now the new place. That's what you are. You are not Ashkenazic anymore. You are now what you are here. And if you'd go back, then you would become. So the minhagim were not people, they were not individually based. They were place-based. That all changed in the modern world. As communities began to wander from one place to another, then instead of seeing minhagim as geographic centered, you begin to see them as family centered and even as individually centered. Obviously, that also has to do with the rise of the awareness of the individual in himself. So that's all a very interesting process, and his response, I think, is capturing a very interesting moment in Jewish history in these type of questions. Okay, so that's one very interesting answer that he's still answering in the name of his father-in-law. Anyhow, his father-in-law, after a few years, his father-in-law passes away, and then he agrees to accept upon himself the position of the Rishon LeZion. Now, he is the last formal Rishon LeZion. There would be others after him, but they would not be appointed formally by the Turkish government, and then the Turkish government would be gone, and the Rishon LeZion gone with it. But it's not only from that perspective that he's the last Rishon LeZion. When we say today Rishon LeZion, what we really mean is the Sephardic chief rabbi. Right? He can be called Rishon LeZion, he can be called whatever you want, but that's what we mean. There is an Ashkenazic chief rabbi, there is a Sephardic chief rabbi. But back then, Rishon LeZion was a very different position. We are not speaking about the chief rabbi. We are speaking about the head of the Jews. As part of that is also giving psikot, for sure. And you would want, if you're a traditional Jew, you would want in your head the chief rabbi. But it is really a political position. That's what is very important to understand. He is the leader of the Jews. Now, obviously, there are also layman leadership. He's not acting in a vacuum. But he is responsible in front of the government, not as a rabbi. The Turks do not care about his skills in writing responsa. He is a leader of people. And the position from now on would shrink and shrink till it would come to what it is today, which is a very important position, but it's a position of a rabbi that if people want, they can follow his psika. In certain things, the state would accept his rulings, such as in marriage and divorce. Then the chief rabbi, now also as back then, had political power, but he had some constitutional power. But back then, the chief rabbi was not only a chief rabbi, as I said, he was the political leader. He could punish people. He could make takanot. He could say, tomorrow all the stores are closed. For example, our hero, Rabbi Yaakov Shaul Eliashar, when Herzl passed away, and as you know, in Yerushalayim, there were different opinions regarding how should we approach the man, Theodore or Binyamin Zehev Herzl. And he decided that all the stores would be closed and there would be a spedim being given. Now, there were a few Ashkenazim that were not very happy with that, but the only thing they could do is sit at home and eat their cake. That was the only thing they could do, because he is the political leader of the place. Okay. Now, as I said, things are changing rapidly. Why is that? As always, the Ashkenazim are to be blamed. Why? Why? Because that's what they are. But because they come in larger and larger numbers into Eretz Israel. And while in the first wave of Olim to Eretz Israel, the majority were religious, at least to a degree, as time passes by, more and more, higher and higher percentage of those coming to Eretz Israel from Europe are not only non-religious, but very actively anti-religious. So the position of the Rishon LeZion as a leader of the Jewish people in Eretz Israel or in Palestine is shrinking, because these are people that are not going to listen to him, because he has two deficiencies. One is a rabbi. Second is Sephardic. Now, I'm sorry that I have to break news for you, but somehow they could relate in some way to someone like Rav Kook, about whom we would have to speak, that is, at least it's Ashkenazi, he's speaking their language, meaning he's speaking Yiddish. And they understand him and he understands them, at least to a certain degree. But this guy with the funny clothes, they have nothing to do with him. The people coming in what we call the second Aliyah, they are socialists, they are progressive. What do they have to do with someone that is seen like he was just taken from the 16th century? Nothing, just nothing. Is irrelevant. It's not, they're not fighting with him. Is irrelevant to them, which again, in a sense, is what happened to the chief rabbi position. So you can be the chief rabbi of Israel, which again is a very, I can respect him very much, both of them. I totally respect them. But in what ways are they leaders? Are they influential? Very minor ways. Again, in certain areas, they were given the power of the law, especially in personal, in marriage and divorce. But a part of that, they are very limited. And even more, I will say, if they would try to play their part too much in the personal area, I think it is clear to all of us that they would lose that as well. So they are playing in a very narrow field. The power is not in their hands anymore. And that is a change that is beginning in the life of our hero. That's why I suggested that we can see him as the last of the Rishon LeZion and as the first of the chief rabbis. Now, he's doing his best to try to stop and pray to reverse this process. So he's really a friend of everyone in Yerushalayim. He's really a friend of everyone, even Eliezer ben Yehuda, right? Who was, you cannot see him as religious in any sort of form. Even he supports, Eliezer ben Yehuda supported his appointment to become the Rishon LeZion because he's an open man. He's both very knowledgeable, but he's also very humane and very accessible. And he was, for example, when you compare him to the Ashkenazi rabbis in Yerushalayim, which were almost all of them very strong Kanaim, then he was modern Orthodox comparing to them. So he was, for example, he was in favor of schools teaching Arabic, which for me, it would be in comparison for us to be teaching English. Now, the Prushim of Yerushalayim, which would later be called Haridim, the term did not exist yet, but the Prushim of Yerushalayim, well, they couldn't believe in learning. Why? Why would you learn such a language? You should just sit and learn Gemara and be given your stipend from the Chalukah. Right? That's what you should do. For heaven's sake, you are in Eretz Israel, you are in Eretz HaKodesh. Why do you think you should do anything else than learn Torah? That was their basic position. And Rav Eliashar was not like that at all. So he was more or less accepted by everyone in Yerushalayim. But when you speak about the new Moshavot, the new settlements, his ability to relate to them and their openness to relate or willingness to relate to him was extremely limited. And I think even that is an overstatement. And that is sad. That is sad. That was a process. I don't think that it was in the power of a single human being to stop. And he came from his own culture background. I don't think that he could really relate to people coming from Europe with all the baggage of what they were coming with. He came from a world very, very far away. And but nonetheless, he did his best in his rounding sermon. So it was in the big shul in Yerushalayim, and he spoke about the need that all you have it in the first page. On the second side is it's source bet. So that's from I cut a few sentences. He says, "Tzarich tnai echad shu ha'ikar." There is one condition that we must stand for. שיהיו כולם יחד באחווה, that we will all be friends. ספרדים, ספרדי, ספרדים, אשכנזי, אשכנזים, אשכנזי. So it says, the Sfaradim, they need not only to be able to live peacefully with the Ashkenazim, they also need to live peacefully with themselves, and the Ashkenazim also with themselves. And Ma'aravi is the Mugrab. So because when you speak about Sfaradim, there are different types of Sfaradim. Right? There are the people from Kushta, or from the east, from Bavel, from Iraq, and there are the people from the Maghreb, from the Ma'arab, from Morocco. Now, for an Ashkenazi, you can look at all, they are all Sfaradim. But that is for them. That is like saying on a mitnaged on the Ashkenazim, or is the Gaon of Vilna, is the Baal Shem Tov. It's the same thing. It's again, you may say it's the narcissism of small differences, but for the people living that, these are their life. So people were fighting all the time between each other. Obviously, Baruch Hashem, now everyone is living in peace. I don't know what we speak about that, but back then they were fighting in this primitive age. צריך תנאי אחד, so there is one condition we must achieve, דהיינו בשלום. We must achieve peace. ואז נזכה לביאת גואלנו, then משיח מוקם, וכמאמר התנא, לא מצאנו כלי מחזיק ברכה לישראל לשלום. As the Tanaim, Chazal taught us that what can really hold a bracha for us is only peace. Because if you do not have peace, any bracha would be given. Money is worthless if you are fighting all the time, and power has no meaning. The only thing, the only kli, the only vessel that can hold the what Kadosh Baruch Hu gifts you is only if you have peace. And the problem is that giving a sermon, I can tell you, giving a sermon is not very difficult, but acting it out is a much more complicated business. Again, is not to be blamed in any way in the direction of things took, that they become that there are chilonim. Again, they're not called chilonim. I'm using now modern terms, but there became people that do not adhere to Torah and are non-observant, and people that are observant, and Sfaradim and Ashkenazim. The whole thing basically became very, very, very polarized. Thank you. Became very polarized. And it became what we know today. I would want to hope that nowadays we are seeing a little trend to the other side, that we are becoming closer to each other, but I'm not sure if that's my hope speaking for my throat or my eyes speaking. So it's a complicated business. But as he was trying to, and that's part of becoming from the Rishon LeZion, who is the political leader of the people in Eretz Israel, trying to become the chief rabbi of the whole world. So it's a give and take, right? Because you lose political power, but you gain maybe spiritual, if we may call it that way, power. So he's giving questions from all over the world, basically. So there's one question here I am quoting. Again, look for the responsa page, the last one. So if you can see it, Yom Kafchet Shvat, Tafresh Nundalet. Can you read the name of the city? Melbourne. So he is being given a question from Melbourne in 1894. I do not know how many rabbis there were in all of Australia in 1890. No, not many. So they are asking him, El Kvod Harav HaGaon HaGadol, Me'or HaGola, Ner HaMa'aravi. So we are writing to the great genius rabbi, the light of the diaspora, the Western candle, מפורסם גם, so that his holiness is famed across the sea. האדמו"ר, מורנו ורבינו, רב יעקב שאול אלישר שליטה, אב בית דין לקהילת קודש הדת ספרדים, so he's the אב בית דין of the ספרדים, וראש הרבנים, not only the ספרדים, the רבנים, בארץ הקודש. See, the chief rabbi, ראש הרבנים, בארץ הקודש. אחרי שים שלום, טובה וברכה לאדמו"ר ואני מביא אליו שאלה. Now look at his question, which again is a very modern days question. ילמדנו רבינו, ישראל נשא נוכרית בנימוסיהן. So a Jew married a non-Jew according to their laws. It's Australia. It's a free country. A Jew can marry a non-Jew. In Yerushalayim, neither back then nor nowadays, that cannot happen. Meaning they can live together, but you cannot register yourself as married to a non-Jew. Baruch Hashem. But in Australia, in Melbourne, no one can stop you. No one wants to stop you. So they went to the city hall. I don't know where in Melbourne you are registered, but they went to wherever you go, and they were registered, this couple, as a Jew and a non-Jew. Now the question is, if she converts, do they have to wait 3 months? Now, I don't want to go into all of the discussion because, again, it's beyond our scope. But he begins by saying, I was so saddened to hear that it's even possible. And he says, the problem is that the governments nowadays are too much permissible. So they allow people to do everything. Now, again, you remember how we had high esteem of the Muhammad Pasha, the man that controlled Yerushalayim with a ruthless hand, and everyone that went 1 inch from his natural position, it was punished. So he is in for strong hand government, and he's all this liberal stuff. That's not for him. So he's very sad. But in the end, it's very interesting. And that's something that you may say he is trying to do, is looking for leniencies. That's something that he is famous for. He's, again, obviously in the confines of halacha, but he's looking for leniencies, and he is allowing their A, the conversion, and B, because there is a question, if she already married him, then maybe the conversion is not sincere, because she's only converting for the sake of marrying him. He says, no, if you see that they could marry without conversion, then that's not the motivation here. So that's a point in her favor. And he concludes that everything is fine, and she can convert, and they don't have to separate even for 3 months. Last question would be from his last days. He dies, as I said, in 1906. He was 89 in his death. That's even for today. That's an old age. I mean, I don't know. Now you can be, I guess, the president of the United States in the age of 89, so that's young. But back then it was considered very old. And he was asked, so that's in the middle source Daled. She'ela, it's also, again, it's a beautiful thing, not only because of his tshuva, but because it's seeing his human side. במקום שנהגו שהעולה לספר תורה הוא הקורא. So there are places, I mean, the Ashkenazim in almost everywhere, so we have the guy that is leaning, the guy that is reading, and we have the guy that is doing the brachot. But these are two separate people. That's why, because many of the Ashkenazim, it's not nice to say it out loud, they didn't know how to read Hebrew so well, and they couldn't read from the Torah. So if you don't want the same person doing all of the aliyot, you had to separate the roles. So one man is reading, and someone else is doing the aliyah. But in the Sfardim, in many places, or in the Yemenites to this day, the same person that is given the aliyah would also be the person that would read. So the question is, in these type of places where the man that is going to the Torah is also the one that reads, can a blind person be given an aliyah, and they would do an exception that someone else would read? That's the question. And you can understand, obviously, the emotional place that this question is coming from, because someone that is blind, he cannot read, and back then you can be blind, not being, remember, there are no cataracts removals, so many people in old age became blind, and there is someone here that wants to get an aliyah, this once a year, but he cannot read. He just cannot read from the Torah, even if he can see. Blind here does not necessarily mean that he's completely seeing nothing, but he cannot read from a Sefer Torah. And he begins to answer like that. Shuvah. האמת תגיד, I first need to speak the truth. כי חלישות מאור עיניי לא יתנוני לתפוס בכסת סופר כירח הקדם. I must begin with telling you that I myself am suffering from dim sight, that I cannot see so good anymore. So I cannot write even the answer as I used to. So I don't know, maybe he gave someone else to write the answers for him. וכמו צער בנפשי, כי בלילה לא אוכל לקרות מתוך הספר כלל. He says, at night, again, they have no artificial lighting. So they in Europe, they already had, but not in Palestine. So they only have candles. And I mean, try you to read from a candle. It's very difficult. And if your eyes are not very sharp, then you just cannot read. It says at night, I cannot read at all. And during the day, ביום, רובי תרדותי, עול הציבור והיחיד, לא יתנוני בולעי רוקי. He says, during the day, I don't even have time to swallow my own saliva. In English doesn't go well. But he says, I don't have time to breathe. Right? That would be in English. So I don't have time to breathe even during the day. So I cannot write answers because I cannot read during the night and I cannot learn during the day. ואף לרגעים שאני פנוי מעט לא אוכל לקרות מתוך הספר, כי אם בקושי גדול סמוך לשם. So he says, only during dawn, that's the times in which people don't come to ask me questions, and there is enough light for me to be able to see. ולאיש אשר אלה לו, איך אוכל להשיב שואלי דבר? Now he says, how can I answer you? And it means, obviously, in both ways. A, I don't have the ability because it's hard for me to read, and B, I'm not objective. I myself suffer from my eyes. And again, he goes into a very long answer. And then in the end of the answer, he says, על כל פנים לדעתן, עלי עיקר לשאלתנו, אמינה בפה מלא. I must say to you with full mouth, דמאחר שנהגו שהעולים הם הקוראים בעצמם כמנהג בני רומניה. Now, Romania here is not our Romania. It's the Romaniots. It's the people, the original, it's not Sfardim even. It's the people from Byzantium. So these are the Romaniots, right? These are the people that we are speaking about. שהביא מרן ז"ל בבית יוסף סימן קמ"א, פשיטא דאליבא דכולי עלמא, סומה אסור לעלות לספר התורה. He says, and that's what I say, I think it's very human. He says, I have to tell you, I myself am blind. So he doesn't just give him the answer, you are not allowed to, and you know, that's what it is. He says, I completely understand you, but I cannot make a lie in my own soul. So I must give you the truth as I see it. And the answer is that you and I cannot get an aliyah in such a place. And even if he knows by heart, he's not allowed because he must read from the Sefer Torah. And even if someone else would read, because people are not used to this separation, so they would think that you are reading as a blind man, then we cannot allow it. And that's his conclusion. זה נראה לעניות דעתי ברור ופשוט, וצור ישראל ייתן כוחנו לעשות הטוב והישר. And that's his answer to that. So again, I think it's very moving and very touching. 2 years before his death, in 1904, I guess he became almost completely blind, and he had to resign from his post as the Rishon LeZion. His son continued him, but his son was not appointed, as I said, in a formal way by the Turkish government. He was the last one to be given a formal appointment writing from the Turkish government. His son was like a memale makom, right? A filling position. Yeah. And 2 years later, in 1906, he passed away, and he was buried in Har HaZeitim next to his stepfather that he admired so much. And now, as I said, his answers are being quoted in modern response. So not enough, because most of them were not printed in new print. Unfortunately, you can see. And they are not in the Responsa project, for example, which I think is chaval. I'm sure that one day it would be added. But a part of his influence as a posek, there are two more ways in which he influenced our own Torah world, and which I would speak about very shortly. One, as I said, is that he was the first one to begin to pivot this position of Rishon LeZion from a political position to a more of it was always a rabbinical position, but spiritual, we may say, position. Now, again, one can see it as a good process or not. It's just the reality. He was responding to the reality on the ground, and this is a process that he began with and obviously is continuing today. The second way in which he has a great influence, Rav Ovadia Yosef saw him in many ways as his role model. The way is, Rav Ovadia Yosef himself wrote a very interesting article in which he analyzed the ways the Rav Yaakov Shaul Eliashar, that is called the Isa Bracha. Isa Yud Shin Aleph is the acronym of Yaakov Shaul Eliashar. So he's analyzing the way that he is writing Tshuvot. He says he begins with analyzing the facts, then he continues to the Talmud, then he brings everyone in the middle. Is not as the Ashkenazim that jump from the Gemara to the conclusions. No, he is giving you all of the poskim, all of the commentators, all of the rabbis that gave an opinion in the middle, in all of the history. And Rav Ovadia Yosef says, and that allows him to be lenient many times. Because if you apply immediately from the Talmud to the Shulchan Aruch to our days, then you just have what is written there. And you cannot be lenient against the Shulchan Aruch. But if you can give 15 opinions that diverge, then you are in a very different position. You are able to be lenient. So Rabbi Yosef says that bringing all of the sources is not only for the tshuva to be complete, which is also important, but it's also part of the project of what they call koach deheitera adif, that the ability to be lenient and by that to try to enable as many people as we can according to the limits of halacha, but to make halacha more accessible, not only to people that are completely departed from this world, but that everyone can follow halacha. They saw it as a goal. Again, you cannot twist halacha like a pretzel. Halacha is halacha. But in the halacha, if you know more, you can be more lenient. That's something that was a character. That's right. Characteristic, thank you. A characteristic thing. It was part of the way that Rav Eliashar walked, and Rav Ovadia Yosef took both the way that he built his response, and if you ever read the response of Rav Ovadia Yosef, it's very long and very comprehensive, and that is just like the Isa Bracha, like the Rav Eliashar. And again, this inspiration to try and make halacha accessible for everyone. And by that, Rav Yaakov Eliashar made a big mark, I think, on our contemporary halachic world. So thank you, and Bezrat Hashem will continue next week.
Thank you so much.